I want you to picture a very normal moment. You're sitting somewhere quiet, maybe late at night, and you check your credit score. It's not terrible, not amazing either, just fine. And you feel strangely judged by that number. You replay decisions in your head. You paid things on time, you avoided debt when you could, you even closed a card once because it felt responsible. So why does the number still feel like it's holding you back? Why does it feel like you're behaving well, but not being rewarded? Most people quietly assume the answer is simple. They think a credit score measures responsibility. But here's the uncomfortable truth. It doesn't. It measures how predictable you are as a borrower and how profitable you are as a customer. And the moment you understand that, the entire system starts making a lot more sense. Because the real flaw isn't that the system is broken, it's that we were taught the wrong game. I'm Lucy, and I've noticed something about credit scores. They don't usually hurt in obvious ways. They hurt quietly, in small percentages, in approvals that almost happen, in monthly payments that feel just a little heavier than they should. Most of the time, you're not being denied, you're just being priced. And it's easy to assume that means you did something wrong, but often you were just playing by a different set of rules than the system was measuring. So if you've ever felt confused by a number that seems to judge your life more than your choices, subscribe. Because here, we don't just explain money, we explain the logic underneath it, so you can move with understanding, not guesswork. Now let's dive in deeper. For years, we've been given a moral story about money. Good people avoid debt. Good people pay everything off quickly. Good people close accounts they no longer need. That sounds reasonable, almost comforting, but the credit system wasn't designed to reward moral behavior. It was designed to measure lending behavior, and those two things overlap less than we think. So people do something that feels incredibly responsible. They finish paying off a credit card, and then they close it. They feel relief, clean slate, closure. And months later, their score drops. No missed payments, no mistakes, just a quiet decrease. That moment is confusing because it violates the story we were taught. You did the right thing, but the system reacted as if you did something risky. Why? Because a credit score doesn't evaluate your past discipline. It evaluates your ongoing relationship with debt. And the biggest flaw hiding inside the system is this. The system quietly prefers consistent borrowers over debt-free people. Not reckless borrowers, not struggling borrowers, predictable borrowers. People who regularly use credit and regularly repay it. You're not being scored on how well you avoided debt. You're being scored on how well you manage active debt. That difference sounds subtle. Financially, it's massive. Let me show you what this actually means in real life. Imagine two people. One avoids using their credit card unless absolutely necessary. They pay it off and eventually close it because they don't like the idea of debt hanging around. The second person uses their card every month for groceries and fuel. They never carry a balance long term, but the account stays open and active. Most people instinctively believe the first person looks safer. The system prefers the second, because lenders aren't trying to find people who never borrow. They're trying to predict people who borrow consistently and repay consistently. From their perspective, no data is riskier than good data. No usage tells them nothing. Usage tells them everything. So the system quietly penalizes inactivity, and that's where thousands of dollars start disappearing. The loss doesn't show up as a fee, it shows up as a percentage. Let's say you're applying for a mortgage, not a luxury mansion, just a normal home, and because of a lower credit score, maybe 60 points lower than it could have been, your interest rate is 0.5% higher. 0.5% sounds harmless, almost trivial, but mortgages don't live in percentages, they live in decades. On a $300,000 loan, that difference can mean paying over $30,000 more across the life of the loan. Nothing dramatic happened, no warning appeared, no one called to explain it. You just paid more every month. quietly. That's why the flaw matters. It's not punishing you loudly, it's charging you invisibly. The strange part is how people respond when they learn this. At first, they feel cheated. Then they feel embarrassed. Then they feel relieved, because suddenly years of confusion make sense. The system wasn't rejecting you, it was measuring something different than you thought. We tend to assume financial systems reward restraint, but lending systems reward reliability. Those are cousins, not twins. Reliability means patterns. Patterns mean activity, and activity means accounts that stay open and get used. So when someone pays off a card and closes it to be responsible, they unintentionally erase part of the pattern that proved their reliability. They removed evidence. From a human perspective, the debt disappeared. From a lending perspective, the data disappeared. And less data means more uncertainty. More uncertainty means slightly higher risk. Higher risk means higher cost. This is the psychological turning point. The credit score is not judging your character, it's estimating your behavior. And behavior requires repetition. Think about it like this. If a friend borrowed money from you once 10 years ago and paid it back perfectly, you'd trust them a little. If they borrowed small amounts every month and paid you back every time, you'd trust them a lot more. Not because they owe more, because they've proven a pattern. The credit system works the same way. Debt-free isn't the strongest signal. Predictably managed debt is. That realization changes how you see almost every financial decision. It also explains a strange paradox people notice later in life. They earn more money, they save more money, but borrowing still feels expensive because income and credit history are not the same thing. One measures capacity, the other measures behavior over time. You can be financially stable and still look uncertain to the system if the pattern isn't visible. So the flaw isn't that the formula hates you, it's that we were taught to exit the system as quickly as possible, while the system was designed to observe you over time. We thought the goal was to avoid playing. The system scores how you play. Now, this doesn't mean chasing debt, and it definitely doesn't mean carrying balances to build credit. That's another misunderstanding born from the same confusion. You don't need to be in debt, you need to be active. There's a difference between borrowing and revolving. One costs money, the other creates history. The healthiest credit profiles often look surprisingly calm. A few accounts, used lightly, paid consistently, left open for years. Nothing dramatic, just visible stability. And stability reduces uncertainty. Reduced uncertainty lowers cost. That's the entire chain reaction. If you zoom out, you start noticing something interesting. Most financial stress doesn't come from one catastrophic mistake. It comes from quiet misalignment. You think you're optimizing one game while the system scores another, so you make logical decisions that produce confusing outcomes. Close accounts to be safe, avoid usage to be disciplined, disappear from the data, and then later you pay more for access to money, not because you failed, but because you became invisible. The cost of invisibility is higher pricing, not punishment, just uncertainty pricing. The emotional weight people carry around credit scores often comes from misunderstanding what the number represents. They feel morally evaluated. They feel behind. They feel like adults who missed a lesson everyone else understood. But most people didn't understand. They inherited assumptions, and those assumptions came from a simpler idea. Debt equals danger. In personal life, that's often true. In lending math, absence equals uncertainty. So the optimal behavior lives in a middle ground that doesn't feel intuitive. Engaged but controlled, active but calm, present but not dependent. Once you see it that way, the number stops feeling personal. It becomes informational. You're not trying to impress it, you're making yourself legible to it. You're leaving a trail of predictable decisions that lowers the cost of trust. And that's all interest rates really are, the price of uncertainty. Higher uncertainty, higher price. Lower uncertainty, lower price. Your credit history is just a record of how uncertain you look. So, what does this mean in real life? It means the healthiest relationship with credit often looks boring. You keep long-standing accounts open even after they're paid off. You use them occasionally for normal expenses. You repay them consistently. You avoid dramatic swings in usage. Nothing extreme, no optimization obsession, just continuity. Continuity is what turns years into evidence. Evidence is what turns lenders into confident lenders. Confidence is what quietly saves you thousands. And maybe the most calming part of this is realizing you don't need perfection. The system isn't waiting for flawless behavior, it's waiting for repeatable behavior. People stress over single mistakes. The score reacts to patterns. One late payment matters less than a long record of reliability. 1 month of high usage matters less than years of stable usage. The timeline softens everything, which means the fix isn't urgency, it's consistency. When you understand that, your decisions feel less emotional. You stop reacting to every small fluctuation. You stop closing accounts impulsively. You stop trying to game the system. You just participate calmly. And calm participation is surprisingly powerful in finance because time does most of the work, not intensity. So the flaw that costs people thousands isn't hidden in a complicated formula. It lives in a misunderstanding. We thought the goal was to escape debt completely and immediately. The system rewards managing it predictably over time. Once that clicks, the anxiety around credit scores changes shape. You stop asking, "Why does it hate me?" and start asking, "What behavior is it trying to observe?" That question leads to clarity instead of frustration. Money systems feel harsh when they're mysterious. They feel manageable when they're understandable. And most of the time, progress doesn't come from dramatic changes. It comes from aligning your expectations with how things actually work. Not perfectly, just steadily. Because financial confidence rarely comes from outsmarting the system. It comes from finally understanding the rules you were already playing under. And once you see them clearly, the number stops feeling like judgment. It starts feeling like feedback. Quiet, predictable feedback. And predictable is exactly what lowers the cost of borrowing over a lifetime. Not overnight, over time, which is where most financial peace actually lives. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video. Don't forget to like and subscribe.